Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Finance Committee of the Bangor City Council. Tonight, in attendance, we have Councilors Hawes, Blanchette, Longo, Weston, Durgan, and Neely. I am Rick Bronson, also a member of the council, and I chair this committee. We also have Finance Director Sear with us, which is handy being that this is a Finance Committee meeting. We have a prepared agenda, and it has 3 items on it. The first one is a consent agenda, which has only 1 item under it. Resolve 11303, appropriating a $60,000 non-point source pollution grant for Capehart Brook Restoration Phase 1.
So moved.
And it has been moved and seconded. Are there any questions, discussion on either the motion or the item itself? Councilor Neely.
Yeah, just a quick note, Chair, because somebody said, we seem to move money quick, and we don't explain it just to explain that it's actually pass-through money from the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, and on a necessary issue that we have no choice but to address, so it certainly makes sense. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that explanation. Anybody else? Okay, this is a consent agenda, so therefore this will be a vote unless doubted. There seem to be no doubting, therefore we move forward. Item 2, overview of public access channel. We'll start with Finance Director Sear just because of her deep knowledge on this topic.
Newly acquired knowledge. And
So long as you have it.
Okay, I'm not going to say how deep it is at this point, but I did want to. We've had a couple of folks in the community who've expressed interest in wanting to, in essence, run our public access channel. So I kind of laid out some background. Back the last time that the city entered into negotiations with the cable provider, part of the franchise agreement established what we refer to as PEG channels. P is for public, E is for education, G is for government. We're well aware of our government channel and how much better it's working now, right? And the E channel is strictly for educational, and I do know that the school department has had some turnover in their IT department, and I know that they are looking at making better use of their education channel for programs that they do within the schools that they'd like to be able to broadcast as well. That just leaves, if you will, the public access channel. As an outgrowth of the cable franchise negotiations, we remained in what was then called the Penobscot Down East Cable Consortium. All of the 12 communities committed 1% of their franchise fees. The consortium hired a third-party provider to facilitate public access. They had a head end at their location. They had the equipment, the studios, et cetera, in order to enable folks to be able to go out and produce a public access channel. The city was in that program for a number of years. In 2004, we withdrew from the consortium, which in effect resulted in the end of programming on the public access channel. At the time that we pulled out, the consortium budget was about $131,000 a year. We contracted with JMAC to manage and operate public access, as well as to provide training to all of the member communities on their on their government and educational information. The cost of that contract was about $90,000 a year, and then there were additional costs for funding of reserves and administrative. Prior to withdrawing, what we looked at was how much usage was the public access channel getting. The last year when we were in it, our fees would have been $48,000, our dues. At the time that we withdrew, there was 3 hours of programming per day from 7 to 10 p.m. And during the remainder of the day, the channel ran as a community bulletin board. So there wasn't a significant amount of usage, I guess, at that point. So we kind of wanted to run through what the requirements are of public access channels. Public access channels must be content neutral programming. There are some exceptions, obviously, for obscene and commercial content, but nobody gets to say who gets on and who gets off. That if it's submitted, it is aired. If there's a complaint from a viewer, then it has to go through a court procedure and all of this. The public education and government channels are exclusively for non-commercial use. The exception is the underwriting, like the PBS model, which is kind of what we adopted in our revised government access policy. But you have to kind of walk a thin line between underwriting and advertising to make sure you stay on the right path. There are also certain infrastructure and equipment needs. One of the major things is a dedicated fiber feed to the head end of Time Warner. JMAC had a head end installed at the time that the cable consortium agreement was entered into. The city of Bangor has a head end, for example, because we broadcast. an MPEG2 video audio server with DVD control and video audio switching is needed to control the storage and scheduling of program content, a DVD player to capture and import content from source DVDs, and then various equipment if you were actually going to operate a production studio, which is what JMac used to do with the cameras, microphones, mixers, etc. In addition, it requires some staff time to provide oversight to make sure that it's operated with the purpose, keeping in the purpose of public access, as well as to manage day-to-day operations, especially if you have studio and or equipment rental type things. At the time that the city withdrew from the consortium, on an annual basis, approximately 27 users put forth programming, 20 of whom were groups from Bangor, and in total, 72 users put forth either programming or bulletin board information. 53 of those were from Bangor. Most, if not all of those groups, were local nonprofit organizations. With the advances in technology, you see it all the time. Everybody's got their own YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook. I mean, there are just so many ways to get your message out. There are a number of other alternatives for community bulletin boards, whether it's any of the local broadcast channels or Time Warner itself. I can only assume that those users have found alternate means of broadcasting their message. And until recently, we'd really heard very little from the public about the lack of public access channel. Over the last several months, 2 individuals have approached the city about their interest in being involved with public access. They've stated their desires to run a great public access channel and only offset some costs through commercial programming. They shared their concerns that Bangor does not dedicate any part of its franchise fees to fund the public access channel. I would also point out that the individual that I shared this memo with, that I'd been dealing with, understands that I had to lay out information, but feels that by the city not using its public access channel, it's ripe to be taken away during the next franchise agreement. The franchise agreement does state that there can be no commercial programming on a public access channel. Individuals or groups have the ability to contract for leased access for commercial programming purposes. Under a leased access arrangement, producers would be required to enter an agreement with the cable operator and pay the fees associated with leasing the channel. Leased access does not require the use of a public access channel. There are some examples, for example, in Bar Harbor. Bar Harbor has an agreement with Dobbs Production, and Dobbs Production does some commercial, has leased access. They lease it on Bar Harbor's public access, but what happens is during those times, the city turns control of the channel back to Time Warner. In essence, it is a leased access agreement. Dobbs contracts directly with Time Warner, and they pay a fee to Time Warner to do that. The availability of a public access channel is governed by the city's current franchise agreement, which is set to expire in October of 2012. Norm had been here previously, and we talked about the fact that he was going to go to the next consortium meeting to see if that is an avenue that the city wanted to pursue again in this next round of negotiations. Does it make sense for us to band together with other communities going forward in negotiations, or go it alone? That first meeting is tomorrow, and he had indicated that once he meets with the group, he'll come back and discuss it with the council so the council can make a determination as to which way it wants to go. Once a determination is made as to how to proceed, the next step will be to develop a list of services, infrastructure, and/or other support to request from the cable provider as part of that franchise agreement, and review that with the council prior to beginning negotiations. Public access will likely be an item up for negotiation. I'm not sure where that falls in the whole scheme of priorities. I don't know, and I can sit here and say I'm sure we haven't identified all of the negotiating points or positions we'd like to take at this point. While we could, because we are a head end, offer public access within Bangor and push it out just to Bangor residents, staff's recommendation at this point is that the city not entertain proposals to operate public access channel at this time, either on its own or as a member of a consortium. The consortium would have to come back together. There are 2 ways to do it. The city could do it on its own. It could do it as a member of a consortium. The discussion of whether or not this is a service the city would like to reactivate it really should be held in the broader context of the franchise agreement negotiations. And until the council can establish the negotiating parameters, I think it might be premature to determine that public access is the highest priority of the city, even though the consortium members would seek in a new agreement. So I just wanted to bring that forward.
The microphone on. All right. Questions and comments from councilors, beginning with Councilor Longo.
Thank you very much. And I don't think this is definitely the highest priority that we face. However, I would point out that media sources like the Bangor Daily, WLBZ2, different communities, different channels and methods have been used in the past to get information out to the people of Bangor. And slowly but surely, they're all kind of going either national, southern Maine, a little more based. And I think that things like the public access channel could be a tool that we have to use. However, I don't think that that's the best use of taxpayer dollars if we're going to be having 3 hours of airtime, or if it's goofy stuff or whatever it is. But I am encouraged by the citizen involvement and the citizens talking about this, and I think that there has been citizen involvement in the past that has worked out. Even Councilor Weston with the people smoking in cars, that was when he was a citizen, and it fostered into a lot of different things. Well, I guess he's still a citizen now, but there's there's a lot of things that we could be capitalizing with that public access, and instead of letting it sit as a dark channel on our TVs right now, if you're fortunate enough to have cable, I don't know if we can look to these people that they can fundraise possibly or something like that to see if they can come up with the capital to actually put this on. Another thing that we could probably save with production costs is the New England School of Communications. I don't know if we could have a relationship where we just kind of give them the opportunity to put their work that they do. They do a lot of content over there, and they could put it on to the public access channel and create a more of a image for them in the community, as well as some entertaining content. I'm not sure, but if we don't do anything, it's still okay, but maybe we can at least look into a couple of these options just to see if we can get something.
Councilor Durgan.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, I'm going to agree with what Councilor Longo just said. The public access channel sounds like it's something that would be nice to have if we were flush and we had additional funds that we could spend on something like this. However, with the use of the government channel and the school channel, we have an opportunity to present to the public fairly extensive information regarding their community. We've seen recently the cooperation with the media being able to help produce things. I use the bath salts issues, and the Bangor Police Department recently did an interesting program. All of these things are the type of things that would be on the public access channel, which we're able to do now with the government access channel. The school department also has extensive capability of doing things on the educational channel as well. So it seems to me that we're covering it pretty well. Yes, this would be nice to have if we had additional dollars that we could throw at it, but unless the city finance officer has a source of funding and has something that she feels could make this very affordable to us, I would propose that we not move forward on this at this time.
Councilor Weston.
Thank you, Chair Bronson. I just wanted to ask the finance director, just for those who didn't hear the beginning of your statement, when we talk about the possibility of eliminating public access television, we're not talking about the channel that we're currently broadcasting on or the school department. We're talking about the channel we're not currently in use of.
That is correct.
Okay.
It's Channel 2, and it has been dark for several years. Public, the government and the education are on 5 and 7 in the Time Warner Network.
Ever since Seinfeld went away. The parameters of that particular channel, does it extend beyond the borders of Bangor?
It can. If we were to drive it from here at the head end, it would only go to Bangor subscribers. But the reason that we came together as a consortium is because we could force it out to the entire franchise group. And that's what used to happen.
Okay.
It used to go to everybody.
I appreciate you bringing that information forward, and I'd be in favor of waiting to see what the costs or the details of the negotiation with Time Warner, the vendor I think we're talking about, to see what that looks like financially. And I'm in agreement with Councilor Longo as well that I think there's educational opportunities and outreach with partnering with a university in our backyard that would give them the opportunity for an asset that they don't currently have. So, thank you.
Counselor Neely.
Yes, thanks, Chair Bronson. And I actually would wait till Norm's through until we have a rough idea of cost and see what can be negotiated. But at the same token, just a little bit different slant. I'd like to think whether it's the CVB in concert with our own Community Economic Development Department or in concert with the Chamber 2 or whatnot, to have something that's really just all about Bangor. And so if it could be negotiated in a way where Bangor ends up being the host. And I just digress to times traveling when in Chicago in a hotel room and I'm watching a channel and it's all about Chicago, and it shows you the Windy City Navy Pier waterfront down at Lake Michigan. It talks about some of the statues and history of the town, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really, when you're traveling anyway, I believe it's something that's an asset for tourists and for people coming through. And let's face it, Bangor now is a town of hotels. And it really does make sense, I think, for people to be able to click onto a channel and see things about the waterfront, hear about waterfront concerts, hear about the history of Bangor. Whether it's fairly remote history, like the early days, right through things that are going on, for instance, that the CVB might have, like the Stephen King tours, et cetera. So I just think it potentially is an asset that could be an extension of economic community development. Perhaps, like I said, in concert with CVB or the Chamber or whatnot. I realize that it can't have a directly commercial use, but I think when you talk about overall promotion of the city, as long as it isn't directly promoting a particular restaurant, a particular hotel or retail establishment, I think there's a way to do it. And if not, I'd like to know how all these other communities, and we've all traveled enough to see other communities that have their local channel that talk about, and it doesn't matter whether it's Boston or Baltimore or St. Louis. I mean, they all have a channel that basically is all about tourism and things to do and places to go. And maybe that is going to be a tough one to slice out in terms of whether it's economically feasible for some time. And certainly, I'd do whatever the most fiscally responsible thing is. But I think it is worth looking into. And depending on the cost, I would like to think that may be one of the most logical uses of that channel. Thank you.
Counselor Blanchett.
Thank you, Chair Bronson. Somebody's going to have to re-educate me on this, but maybe I have the wrong information in my head, and please correct me, Deb, if I'm wrong. If public access, someone submits a show, it has to be allowed if it's not obscene, pornography. I can think of many shows that could run on public access that are extremely offensive to certain segments of the population. And they would be aired. People would put them on, and I have to tell you, even if it's run through a private group, you're going to have them picking up the phone and dialing City Hall. Because if it's public access, it must be owned and controlled by the city of Bangor. I think we're well served now. I'm very happy with what we're doing on Channel 5 and 7. And I think Megan's doing a remarkable job setting up the web page. There are more things in the process to come that we do control. And I think the people, the citizens in Bangor, like having city government separated from the school department, because if you want to watch a school board meeting, you can turn it on and find out when they're going to recap that school board meeting. If they want to come on and find out how badly I behaved at the last council meeting, they can check the schedule and find out when that's going to run. So I think that's just, we're well served. I am scared to death of the public service. Now, I mean, because, oh God, can I shut my mic off and say this? There are a lot of strange people out there with a lot of strange ideas, and if they submit a program and the contents are not obscene, pornography, whatever, it has to run. And I'll tell you, our heads are gonna be on the chopping block. And that's fine. If it was going to be an asset to the city of Bangor, I would say, too bad, that comes with the job. You know, take your swipes at us. But what would offend segments of the population out there? I cannot think of any way that it would be an asset to the city of Bangor, because we are well served by our 2 channels. That's all I want to say.
Does the city manager have comments at this time? No? Okay. Other comments from councilors? Well then, maybe I could make my comments. Not unlike some of what I've heard around the table here already, I am terribly what I will call content nervous. Should we put this on the air? In fact, my content nervousness extends so far to the idea that if the school department is about with the educational channel to air different things from what is on what I see today, I think that's fine, but I sure would hope that any advocacy for budgets that are not yet approved would take place only in school board meetings, and we wouldn't suddenly see advocacy programming even on the educational channel. And so when we come to public access and it pretty much anything goes, I would expect advocacy for things that will never come before this council, but might be a little odd, some of them. And I also see in here a discussion of utilizing money that is not being spent for this purpose now, and I suspect our next budget will be tighter yet than we've enjoyed in the last couple of years. I think we're going to be searching for ways to save even small amounts of money, and yet here we would have to expend money we're not currently expending. And I also see there's a discussion in here of an equipment rental pool, and that strikes me as absolutely unworkable. And given the fact that the University of Maine and New England School of Communication and some private entities in the community have such equipment and it is available for rent, I see no purpose to that whatsoever. And as per what a couple of councilors have said, if we are going to do this, I think NESCOM might be a marvelous starting place. But my thought is, if people so badly want to get themselves on TV, then let them bear the costs of getting themselves on TV. And I would hope if we run a public access, a bit of a free-for-all channel, that there are frequent disclaimers that say the content here was not approved or provided by the city of Bangor, because I certainly don't want us to appear to have provided some crazy content that I could imagine. And lastly, I would say, I know we're spending a lot of effort and time, and we've done much better. I think we were doing a good job to begin with, but we're doing much better at getting all the information we can out to the public. I hearken back to, I'm so old I still read newspapers, and on the op-ed page of the Bangor Daily about 10 days ago, we had a well-phrased op-ed in National Peace that discussed the over-connectivity of today's environment and society. Maybe something entertaining can come on this, and maybe something enlightening can come on this, but there is the possibility that this could just be yet further chatter. So those are my thoughts, and Councilor Weston wants to either support them or go in another direction.
Oh, thank you, Chair Bronson. No, just a statement that you made has made me think of a question that we have yet to ask. This was a 15-year contract, the one that's expiring now, and we have Channel 2 currently. So how much are we expending on an annual basis for the current channel that we have?
None.
None. So that was not a fee-for-service programming?
Channel 2, which is the public access channel, is dark at this point. There is nothing airing on it.
Was it dark at the beginning of that?
No, it was
15-year
not.
contract?
It was on the air until probably sometime late 2004, late 2003. It was on the air.
What was the annual fee should that station stay up
For the-
during that contract? Yeah.
Well,
regardless of whether we vetted it out or not, what was the Bangor's fee? Should we keep it?
Bangor's share at that time as a member of the consortium was $48,000.
Thank you.
If I understand this correctly, the $48,000 was not to Time Warner. The $48,000 was to the operator of the channel.
That's correct.
Right, we were part of the game. I'm going to let Councilor Weston finish, then I will come to you, Councilor Blanchett.
And I'll continue because Councilor Bronson seems to be my yang to the yin here. The $48,000 that was given to an outside vendor was our contribution towards the outside vendor's management contract. But is there a fee in actually having the channel in and of
No.
itself?
No, it was part of the cable franchise agreement. It was provided to us at no cost.
So the equipment that we currently have now would be sufficient should we choose to keep Channel 2 operative? Or do we have to buy another duplicate set of what
We have to buy more equipment. Part of it is, let's say, for
Should
example.
we choose to not have our own broadcasting
Correct.
studio?
If the city wanted to operate and push out public access programming from here, we could do that. We would need duplicate equipment because the equipment we have will handle 2 channels.
I understand.
It won't handle
Thank
3.
Councilor Blanchett.
Yeah, I just, I really am getting shivers thinking about what could go on. We know the mood of the country right now. We know the mood of the state. It's government by referendum, and that's exactly what people are leaning for. They think referendums are the answer to every problem that we have, both statewide, federally, and locally. The misinformation that has been put out there on the auditorium construction would stagger your mind if you put it all together. Public access could do that. Are we going to turn around and try to rebut anything that's going out there that's wrong? And do we use our channel or do we use public access? This is not a tool that I find a must-have in local, city, state, or federal governments. I think this is a bad tool. It's a tool that incites people because people hear what they want to hear, and they accept what they hear because it suits their frame of mind at that time. It's a dangerous situation to put ourselves in. I'll say it. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and people are eventually going to understand what I'm saying. The Bangor City Council is as transparent in our form of government as anybody you will ever meet. There are no secrets, there are no behind closed doors, and people that insinuate or say that our decisions are made in that office and there want to believe that. They truly want to believe that. But we're counselors and we know better. We know that we lay everything out on the table. This station that they're proposing public access, it really will. Think about what could happen. Just think about, and the angry mood is out there for it to happen. It's not something that we need, and it's certainly when it was in its heyday, and Deb and I remember that, it was never at its best worth $48,000 a year, because you think you had trouble seeing our? No. So I think we're served well by 5 and 7. We can fill it up with the information that is important to Bangor taxpayers. And if you want to vote, or you're going to call for a vote, Mr. Chairman, I would vote that we just stop the process on this public access right now. I don't think it needs to go any further.
Councilor Longo.
Thank you. My comment wasn't in regards to Councilor Blanchett's, but I wanted to say that there are a lot of potential problems that this could create, but there could be a few things that were really awesome that get put out by the people out there. And with regards to anger, I think that there's legitimate reasons to be angry at some of the things going on, not with our own council, but I guess even with our own council, if you could say you were against backyard chickens or something like that. But legitimate reasons with the way the federal government is behaving in some ways with the state government. However, I don't know if the public access channel would be the best place to vent that. But my question is, the state government has web streaming of all of their committee meetings, or when they're on the state in session or whatever. And I just wonder if there was any possible way that we could have that put on the public channel, like they're not there streaming, but actually so people could see what's going on in Augusta somehow. If we could maybe have a partnership with the state somehow that for a low cost, or because I think that would be really good if you knew what your senator or your state representative was doing down in Augusta, and it might spark some more, I guess, interest in some things.
Councilor Durgan.
Thank you, Chair. One of the comments in our information packet here has to do with the council establishing negotiating parameters. From what I've heard this evening, we would be negotiating around the access and use of a channel which we would become responsible for, have to operate, have to maintain the equipment for, and make available to the general public that could put something on here as long as it wasn't of questionable content. And I understand questionable content is basically related to sexual content and that sort of thing. Then we would be opening the door very wide to anyone who had an idea that they felt they had to get in front of the public, regardless of its intent. We hear a lot about First Amendment rights and freedom of speech, and I certainly support that fully, but I don't see any advantage either to the public or to the city for our spending. And if $48,000 was the cost under the old contract, even though we don't have a figure in front of us, it's hard to imagine that we could do this for anything less going forward. And I would not be in favor of our committing those kinds of funds, considering the fact that we're going to be looking at the 2013 budget coming up here very shortly, and we're going to be looking at other costs that are going to be, I think, a more important nature to the city. Thank you.
Other comments from other councilors? Finance Director Sear.
I just want to clarify one point. The arrangement that was in place before had us working with the consortium in total, and that was our fee at the time, $48,000. That's not to say that there aren't other ways in which to accomplish public access. For example, the couple that I've been corresponding with are saying that, they want to be able to do it in exchange for commercial programming. I've explained we can't allow commercial programming. You'd have to work directly with Time Warner to lease access. Don't know if that kind of arrangement would work out or not. Don't know if an arrangement with NESCOM would be, agreeable to not only Bangor, but the entire consortium membership, because I think it would be in all of our best interest to not all do our own thing. Let's not reinvent the wheel. But I think they're all options that come up as part of the overall cable negotiation process. Nobody says you have to have equipment rental. Nobody says you have to have studio space. So there are a lot of things that, while that's how it was done before, it doesn't mean that's how it would have to be done in the future if this is what the council determined it wanted to be a priority. But I do believe, you talked about, the public access channels. I think negotiations for the cable franchise agreement are going to include things like internet access. They're going to include live streaming. They're going to include broader broadband, some other, I'll look at Councilor Weston to give me the techie things, but there are a number of other technical type services that I believe would be higher on the city's list for points of negotiation. But we won't know that for a while.
Now the city manager.
I want to first state I agree with everything that's been said here, and I agree with Deb's recommendation. Having said that, I just spent 45 minutes with the gentleman who Deb has talked to, and I just feel a little compelled to at least give some of the upsides. It is a community access program. He has been taping football games and things like that he wishes to play. Again, I agree with the recommendation, the finance director, that that's not really a high priority for funding right now, but I do think there are some upsides to public access, and I think you guys did a good job. I just wanted to make sure you understood that there were people interested, and they will come back to you with those upsides, and I want you to at least consider them.
Councilor Neely.
Excuse me, I didn't know, Chair, if you wanted a motion or if we need one or not.
I was about to say I
but
didn't.
I would move staff recommendation.
But I don't sense a genuine recommendation here. What I sense is it says that they'd like to understand our parameters, and it seems to me, I was about to ask
No,
That's after.
no, that's after. At this point, these individuals have been. I've been in contact with them for a long time, and we want to submit a proposal. We want to submit a proposal, and I said I need to go back and get the background. And my recommendation is that the city not A, accept proposals, nor that we solicit proposals to operate public access at this time.
Okay, I guess I didn't read that as a recommend. That seems to be the motion. So Counselor Neely, back to you. Might that be your motion?
Yes, I move staff recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Great.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. So therefore, any discussion on the motion itself? I don't hear any, so therefore this will be a vote unless doubted. And we'll move to the next item.
The next,
Item 3, amendment of fund balance policy, Finance Director Seer.
we just amended the fund balance policy in June, and what we've come to find is that back in 2001, the city moved away from its defined benefit pension plan retirement system through Maine State Retirement and went through a defined contribution plan. Hopefully, folks, the difference obviously being that contribution plan, once you've made your contribution, you will never have additional liability that comes up. What we found out as being a member of the defined benefit plan was that the plan was underfunded and we were on the hook for about $33 million, which we paid. So, once we move to a defined contribution plan, under that plan, employees are vested upon the completion of 1 year of service. Employees who separate prior to vesting forfeit the city's contribution. All forfeited employer contributions are held by the plan sponsor and can only be used to pay current employer contributions. What we found is we have some forfeited money sitting with ICMA. I think what makes the most sense is that we amend the benefit reserve portion of the fund balance policy to allow myself in consultation with the city manager to place the value of the forfeited 401A contributions that we use to pay current year retirement contributions into the benefit reserve. At this point, we are taking about $90,000 out a year out of that benefit reserve because the Maine State retirement rates are continuing to escalate. That is not a practice we'll be able to sustain, but on the flip side, nobody new can get into Maine State retirement, so theoretically you have fewer and fewer participants on an annual basis. So this will provide us an additional means of funding the benefit reserve for future years, and obviously those funds can't be used for any other purpose.
Questions or comments from councilors? Councilor Durgan.
Thank you, Chair. Deb, I just want to make sure that we're all reading this the same way. Your recommendation would mean that only the forfeited employer share could be used as his contribution to pay current year contributions. Is that correct? Only the employer share.
That's correct, because upon separation, the employee receives their contribution back.
Other questions and comments? Oh, yes, continue.
It would seem to me then that is an amount of money that has been allocated in the budget process anyway. So by having the capability of applying that to the amount that we have that we're required to pay on an annual basis, it's going to mean in the long run we'll actually save dollars on this because we will be using committed funds to do that and not losing the money over a period of time. It will have an opportunity of building the fund balance to the point where our capability of paying in each year is going to have us be able to reduce the amount we commit in our annual budget.
Councilor Weston.
Thank you, Chair Bronson. For the Finance Director, and I appreciate Councilor Durgan's clarity on the topic, what happens now with the employer's set-aside contributions should an employee leave?
It is sitting in an account at ICMA and called forfeited contributions.
It's untouchable?
It's just sitting there. The only way we can touch it is we can use it to pay our weekly contribution amount in this fiscal year. And what it does result in is it does result in savings in the current fiscal year. And what this policy amendment would allow us to do is to take those savings and put them into the benefit reserve to fund future benefit increases.
So it's not, in essence, it's not attached to the greater sum for interest purposes. It's sitting on its own and not gaining as much as it could.
It does earn interest because it does sit as an investment account at ICMA, yes.
So is this essentially just an accounting practice? We both have access to the money. We're just consolidating the funds. Is that?
We don't have access to the money until we ask to use it to pay our contributions.
Okay, so because I'm simpleton in this particular topic, if we have access to it to pay the contributions that we're talking about, then where is the shortfall between where it stands now and where it would be? What is the major benefit for moving it out of the
I think
account?
his question is, what does this change?
That's a good point.
Okay, what it would allow us to do is to use the money that's sitting at ICMA to pay current year contributions, resulting in a current year savings, because we've already budgeted to pay the full amount of the contribution. And those savings, we could place them in a benefit reserve fund to offset future year increases through the budget process.
So are we not, I guess my real question, are we not allowed to touch the current amounts as they sit now to pay off current year contributions?
We are.
Do we sometimes end up
But we
leaving
haven't.
money on the table at the end
No.
of the year that we've not wiped out?
It doesn't. It doesn't extinguish. It just sits and accumulates, and it's just after 10 years we went, oh my gosh, we have accumulated money in here, and we need to do this, and it's just not a practice or anything that we've done ever to date.
Please.
I think the one point that it really does do is allow us to take it from more of a reactionary, we're just going to pay it into what we've already what we already have budgeted, and allow us to plan so that next year we can come to the council with our budget plan and say we're going to use this much from the benefit reserve. So as opposed to over budgeting and sort of working it that way, we get to put it in a reserve and then plan how we're going to make those expenditures out of that fund. Does that make any sense? That didn't help?
No, not really.
Okay.
It made sense to me.
I guess it would only make sense to, and I apologize for being difficult, but I really do want to understand the topic that we're talking about. And I thought I knew money. I don't have any idea what we're talking about here. This would only make sense to me if the amount in the current fund, as you described, as ICMA is what you said, was blind to us. Like for budgeting and using purposes, this only makes sense if that amount is blind to us and we don't know what's there. You're saying that we have access to it to pay current year contributions, and it certainly could be figured into future budgeting. So if we have access to it for contribution and we know that amount's there and we can figure that into future budgeting, I'm still at a loss as what the defined benefit is to this change. Not being difficult, but certainly just not seeing the connection.
We at the staff level have no authority to place any savings in a benefit reserve without the council's approval. By amending this policy in a year where there's no guarantee that anybody's going to separate from service and that you're going to have any money accumulated in there that you can use to pay current year benefits. So we don't typically know that going into the budget year. We do know it partway through. We do know it at the end of the year. By amending the policy, this grants authority to myself and the city manager to go in and look and say, okay, there's $10,000 in there. Well, let's go ahead and use it to pay the current year contribution and use the savings that we have in our current budget to add money to our benefit reserve.
Okay, so let me ask another question. And I really feel like I've got a spotlight on me now, because if I'm the only one that's not getting this, please step forward and tell me to shut up. But is this simply just a process expedition? Like,
yes.
This is all we're doing is just giving you quicker power to do what you
Correct.
need. This is not. There's no math gains. There's no.
No.
Thank you.
I think this will adjust policy to reflect reality.
We haven't done it yet because we don't have the authority,
Don't
but
have
yes.
the policy, yes. Other comments or questions from other councilors? Councilor Blanchett.
I think just a question to the finance director. We only started with this 401K, how many years ago? Was it
It's been almost 10 now. It's
10
been just
years
over
ago?
10.
So this problem hasn't come, it's finally reached a point where Deb has
Where it's
said,
worth it.
we've got to do something with this. We have all this accumulated money. We can prepay. Is what you're going to do? Prepay benefits that were already budgeted for this year. And so I can understand why, because we just went into this 401K a few years ago. So it hasn't been 150-year
Councilor
problem.
Weston, continue on.
Thank you, please. Just to further clarify the lack of clarification, I was looking for a financial benefit. Everything that you can do financially and everything you can do fiscally, you can currently do in the structure that we have now, except you need approval to do it. You'll have the same assets, you'll have the same access, you'll have the same ability. You'll be able to expedite the process and not ask for permission. That's exactly where, there's no fiscal
Correct.
financial benefit. This is just a time savings on paperwork.
I would back up just a tad and say there is a fiscal benefit because it allows us to add money to our benefit reserve.
All right,
Because
I'm going to stop
okay.
because every time I ask another question, I get 4 more. So I'll ask you off camera. So thank you.
Councilor Durgan.
I'm reminded that Councilor Weston's dad is a CPA, but
Councilor Durgan, my accounting degree also is coming into question at this particular time. So
I think the point that perhaps we're all missing is that we have a fund balance policy, which the council has adopted. And what the director is asking is to have the language amended for the fund balance policy by the council so that this transaction implement that's available can be used without reference back to the council each time they want to do it. This is basically cleaning up the language in the fund balance policy that's on the books. And we made a change earlier this year to clean up that policy, and this will just help clarify it a little more. It's really not giving any more authority to the finance director than she has. It's just stating that authority in the policy and making it available so that the staff can work with this in a more convenient way than having to come back specifically to ask Mother May I each time they want to do it.
Councilor Neely.
Yes, thanks. I want to move staff recommendation, but before I do, Chair, I have to say something in regard to Councilor Weston, because the fact that he's a brilliant creative mind, and which is really a right bank thing, to have any left bank at all and to have gotten an accounting degree is pretty good. So kudos to you for that. And actually, this is in a way sort of complicated, because I've actually worked with retirement plans and whatnot, and I had some difficulty at first understanding why this mechanism was necessary. And I think it really just does allow a little bit more flexibility, but doesn't change materially, because as Councilor Durgan said, these are monies in prior budget years that were already authorized for said purpose. So, it's really just allowing a little more discretion. With that, I'd move staff recommendation, Chair.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Councilor Weston.
are you surprised, Chair
Not at
Bronson?
this moment, no.
No. Thank you for bringing both my degree and my brain into question and I appreciate this being not only recorded but shown over and over and
High
over
rotation.
again, and soon to be on the web. So thank you for that. The only question I have, and it'll bug me because I'll forget to ask it, is I completely understand the process, the Mother May I reference that Nelson brought in, and with a 6-month-old, I appreciate that nursery rhyme reference as well. It brings it down to my knowledge. The fiscal note that the finance director, the fiscal savings that the finance director forwarded is still in question in my mind, and I'm wondering if you might be able to bring it down to a nursery level example so that I can actually absorb this.
Sure. So last fiscal year, we contributed $5,000 for our employee contributions, and those employees left in a year. So that $5,000 has left the city, and it's sitting at ICMA. When the employee leaves, it gets moved into this other account, employer forfeited funds. So we have an account at ICMA that says, I have $5,000 in me. In this fiscal year, we have fully budgeted our contributions to the retirement plan. The city's contribution is 100% budgeted. What this would allow us to do is to go to ICMA and say, the $5,000 of our money that you have, we want to use it now. That will save us $5,000 in the current fiscal year.
Okay, and this is where I'm going.
This is I can see the eyes.
And I get it. Can you not do that now?
I can't do that now without the council's approval, no. And we have never done it before. And
Okay, so there is no fiscal, this is where you're confused. There is no fiscal savings. This is just a time savings.
there is a fiscal
It's
saving.
a fiscal savings, okay.
Because
we're not
this
doing it.
money that's sitting over at ICMA, we get to, in essence, bring it into the current year and create a savings.
But technically, you could do that now if you brought it before the council and asked.
Correct. And instead of bringing it to the council and asking for this one specific time, what I did was bring it forth as an amendment to the fund balance policy that it will allow the city manager and the finance director to do this on a as-need basis. It doesn't some years it could accumulate $3,000, some years it will accumulate $10,000. It really depends on the turnover.
And this is where I draw my confusion in government speak. You know, if we have a budget item that we propose to fund with an increase of 50,000 and we end up funding it only with an increase of 30,000, it's been said that we've cut it 20,000. And it's the term that gets thrown back and forth that doesn't relate to the private sector. So in fact, there's no fiscal note here at all that's being saved, but the only savings is happening is that the fact that you're not doing this act now, and you will be able to do the act quicker later, but there's really no financial savings to the move that you're proposing. So I'm going to close my my mind, I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to move on to the next item. So thank you.
Councilor Blanchett.
Deb, bear with me, walk with me, hold my hand. When employee A works for the city contributes 5% to the 401K. The employee, I'm just going to use these hypotheticals, and the city puts 5% in, the employee puts 5% in. The employee terminates their work with the city of Bangor, and they take their money that they've contributed, the 5%, with them. Bye-bye, gone. Ours goes into this reserve. In where is it?
This money goes into an account in our name at ICMA.
ICMA.
Yep.
Okay, so that is money that was spent out of city budgets, paying the employee's portion of a 401K. Employee's gone. We've got money here. So that's where that is coming from. And it is a budget reduction because Deb and Kathy, with the council of the permission, can bring this $10,000 or $5,000 forward and reduce what our expenses are going to be in 2013 because we've already budgeted everything for 2012. Now, do I have to say Mary had a little lamb?
Chair Brunson, I think that was directed, if you, through you, I think. I think it was Mother May I as we were going on this one. Councilor Blanchett, with all due respect, I understand perfectly the analogy that you just gave. The only question I have that seems to have been cleared up is that same thing can happen today, it just doesn't.
Right, this is procedural.
This is
Councilor
procedural, not financial, so.
Actually, Councilor Blanchett made a very cogent discussion of what I was going to say. But if you look at let's say a $28 million budget for this fiscal year, and in there is $5,000 that we are planning to spend on employee X who leaves, and next year we have exactly the same budget, we can reduce that by $5,000 by transferring this money. And it can be done without reference back to the council if we pass this change to the rules that we have now. It's a pretty simple process, and I know that dealing with these kinds of things can be kind of mind-bending, and I don't want anybody to get their mind any more bent than it is, but it makes sense. It will be a fiscal saving in any time that we can transfer from one year to the next. And in order to do that, I think we need to amend the benefit reserve policy.
The further we go into this, the deeper it gets. Councilor Longo.
No, this makes complete sense.
And that's when I resigned, right there.
I was just wondering how much are we talking about here that's not being used right now, that's kind of sitting there waiting for us?
After 10 years, 10 and a half years, it's accumulated $90,000. So it's about $9,000 a year.
Other questions, comments, or pieces of enlightenment from any counselor? I suggest that we have a motion and a second, and momentarily we'll vote on it. I suggest that what we're doing here is simplifying our lives, and this last 20 or 25 minutes proves it. So we have a motion and a second. This will be a vote unless doubted. Wasn't doubted. Everything about it was doubted, but not the vote itself. So there we are. And that completes our agenda for today, as I understand it. Great. What was the question? Yeah, my secret agenda, yes. But I lost it, so I lost my copy of it, so it's gone. So therefore, we'll adjourn. Thank you.